You just look at what the paparazzi does to those that they stalk and sometimes harass, and there's your indication of how this goes. So that's what also scouting elements do. They perform covert night raids against enemy forces. Sometimes just to rob them of sleep, keep them on their toes, put them in a constant state of stress. Sometimes they do sabotage work on their equipment or mislead them in various ways. All these types of activities are meant to wear down the enemy. Well, imagine how in East Germany, targets of the Stasi program of espionage against East German citizens, imagine how they must have felt as their lives were corroded by the methodology named after this very effect, corrosion. So these techniques are employed, and think of how they would be augmented. I mean, they must have existed in the past in various forms, but think of how now they would be augmented by instant communication, cell phones, smartphones working wonders, plus the panopticonic surveillance grid augmenting all this. You have networks which operate in a quasi-legitimate role, surveilling the public for its own safety, dovetailing their work in with these operations on a more local level. We live in a society where this could proliferate, just as it did after World War II in East Germany, and much more efficiently. And given that given how cognitive dissonance and ethical dissonance operates with people, someone not targeted would just soon not be targeted. If you are truly properly targeted by this methodology, this system of attack, it will happen to you before you're aware of it. In most cases, a long time before you're aware of it, as they build up a dossier, as they build up a model, and as they find out what works, what doesn't work, what your proclivities are, what skeletons are in your closet, what your capabilities are, and they get a full picture of the person they're trying to dominate, and then they go for the full spectrum dominance of that individual or group. I mean, this is just proper procedure. This is just par for the course. But to the person experiencing it, especially if they've done nothing wrong, maybe they're a control element for the study of how these systems can be made effective against anyone targeted. Some people are just are innocent, relatively speaking, and are chosen to enter these programs as a control. And if you think of that fact and how it seems to them, imagine how surreal it is to anyone who has no contact or experience with it. The average person will be immune to the consideration. Plus, there's the chilling effect of such a thing. It seems alien and twilight and high strangeness to the average person, and they would want nothing to do with it. It would seem like encountering a crazy person. And in fact, psychiatry's worked closely with these systems of harassment in order to legitimize them by disenfranchising the target often of their status as a rational person of sound mind. And so they've concocted a narrative which frames them to be someone dismissible by the average person, and puts them further in a box of control for those doing the harassment. Such things are real, and high-profile individuals or persons who are likely to be targeted know that it's real and take measures against it, and are properly always vigilant about those things. Persons who don't have the advantage of a lot of resources at their disposal, but are nevertheless, perhaps like myself and others, whom you could readily think of susceptible to being targeted by such programs, know full well what they are like, without need of the extra resources that more high-profile individuals can bring to bear in their self-defense, especially if one is observant to novelty, to detail, able to intelligently analyze data, and has a strong intuition and perhaps even some degree of extrasensory or psychic faculty functioning, or nascently developing or coming online. And of course, it's not unlikely that those would be especially targeted because of that, because of those aspects. It's not unlikely that they might not be targeted from birth in some cases, but it's not unlikely that they might be kept on file as a potential recruit for various reasons, and this might be a form of pressure on them to become more amenable to cooperating with those who would control them and use them as a resource. All these factors bleed in together, run together to form one river of a phenomenon which is called gang stalking, organized gang stalking. It can be compartmentalized and decentralized so that no participant in the program is fully aware of the impact they're having or on the details or true nature of the individual that they're targeting, or even that they're targeting someone in some cases. Instant communication, quantum supercomputing, large-scale quantum supercomputing, artificially intelligent algorithm devising systems of computing, software and firmware, hardware, enable, when the information is fed into these systems, like for example in the fusion centers, enable for there to be real-time tailoring of some aspects of this program. Instant communication especially helps. So for example, through Lilywave or Wi-Fi modulation of individuals, they may be stimulated to cough or sneeze or yawn without even knowing that that's happening. They just feel like doing those things. And it just so happens that sometimes when they do these things, and they may be blind to any of this, sometimes when they do these things, it's when a certain person's in the environment. And they may be totally unaware of the connection. But that person finds in every environment they go in, this happens, characteristically, even without themselves being seen. It can be rationalized that, say, a cell phone or some other type of implant alerts somebody that it's time to do that thing, whatever it is. Or it could be that it just stimulates some primitive part of the nervous system to encourage it, to cause it to happen. There could be subconscious elements because of subliminal programming, which could encourage these types of events to happen so much and in such a way to one individual as to sensitize them to them, so that it becomes a permanent form of destabilization. Now, any innocent cough, sneeze, or yawn becomes a reminder of the trauma. It's trauma restimulation at that point. These things would the average person be blissfully unaware of them, and wouldn't want to be anything but blissfully unaware of them. And many targeted persons who become sensitized to these attacks have reported a profound wish to return to that simpler, naive state, blissfully unaware of such things. Especially after giving up trying to communicate it to anybody, because people just mock and deride and don't want to have anything to do with it. Then you have the aspect of witting involvement. There are perpetrators who are just happy to be involved in this kind of demonic, childish, prankster-ish cruelty, especially if they're remunerated properly, they're given what they want, or are granted the semblance of being given something of value. They're likely to go along and play that Judas role. Friends and family could be turned, given the proper rationale and inducement. These kind of things are very serious, and they would be summed up as sowing of discord, as well as calumny. Sometimes agents are set up to disinform people in that person's environment, to convince them of things about the person which are either not true or exaggerated, or which look ominous or defamatory to that person, so as to encourage a corrosion of the hospitality of their environment, and to turn all their environments into something sinister against them, by making them appear more sinister to their environments, for example. these kinds of programs are equivalent in standard warfare as psychological warfare procedures to demoralize the enemy by various means of harassment, as already mentioned, and as well as by propaganda warfare against them by targeting their troops and their civilian populations with leaflets or voice of God weapons or various directed energy weapons and other forms of propaganda to destabilize the environment's psychological harmony with the enemy, and to make it disharmonious to them. In this case, the targeted individual in the civil environment. So these processes ongoing. You can see how impactful this type of a system could be, and the type of persons that could be involved could be either various shades of witting or unwitting, and various degrees of willing and unwilling, and at worst, completely witting and completely willing. I'm gonna bring up another aspect of this, which is weaponized currency, weaponized counterfeit currency. The Federal Reserve Bank and other entities can issue remuneration to participants in these programs so as to convince them to do the things that they do. And for some, it might not take even much encouragement. And of course, just like with other scams, those persons may never receive what they were promised, or receive less, or it may be taken from them, or when they're no longer useful for the project, they themselves may be eliminated and those funds either kept or recouped, or whatever other inducements. I mean, it's all open-ended from the point of view of those conducting the warfare. Many of the elements used in it are considered disposable, and very little of it is indispensable. What's indispensable is victory to them, progress against the enemy, consolidation of control and power in this case in society. That ongoing, you recognize that there could be front companies created entirely out of thin air, or propped up, or bribed into operating as a front, or individuals. There could be individuals occupying those roles and positions, which are inflated by being ensconced in them by protection money, by bribes, by subsidies. It goes on and on. They could also be threatened with blackmail, and of course, when one becomes addicted to these types of remuneration and bribe, and when one is concerned for one's life if one should try to quit the program or not participate in it, they could be fearful of being targeted as well, and there's an ominous sense that might happen anyway, and so that's something they would want to avoid. Their continued and long-term persistence at these activities is easy to understand. Their motivation is easy to understand, especially if they're given a rationale or a narrative or a story that makes it feel good to them to do these things. Some will do it out of just malice and bad criminal character anyway. The Gnostics, in many instances, were wiped out by armies of conscripted criminals, released from prison by the civil authorities, and who were encouraged by the papacy to do so, and they were often given the rationalization that these were subhuman or demon infested heretics, unworthy of life anyway. Kill them all, let God sort them out, as the evil Catholic priest said. So, I mean, these types of programs have been going on in various forms and on various scales throughout history. So there's nothing unintelligible about it. There's nothing incoherent about it. What's exceptional about it is that in our modern era, we have technology now that can augment and catalyze these techniques to make them less detectable, more precise, more pernicious, more impacting, more effective. Psychotronics can augment these same types of militant activities against individuals so as to dovetail in with the input of the stimuli to augment the sensitization, the throughput, so as to alter or manipulate the way the target individual and also the participants analyze or think of or process the input, and the output can also be regulated. Also, it's possible that elements of the stable institutionalized authority apparatus can be easily involved in these activities along various lines of rationale and persuasion as well, which Department of Homeland Security has sort of crystallized into one consolidated effort. And we've seen the result of this new form of really Stasi apparatus already, but they're integral to these activities, and they get a lot of their a sense of justification for what they do as a central dedicated group of actors, of agents from the federal government and from local authorities who want to cooperate to just basically get rid of nuisances and enhance control, and also sometimes to target actual terrorists and criminals, or at least keep control over them and keep them handy as a scapegoat or as a new great witch to hunt, right? Such as how the CIA and other intelligence agencies kept close tabs on people in government and in private life, and worked with drug dealers and other black market profiteers to play both sides of the social conflict game. These kind of circumstances obviously bleed into what I call the thin bureaucratic line, so that elements of the infrastructure of a city or nation can be used as a weapon as well, so that people can be dispreferred or rejected from programs, can find that their living environment, because of the cooperation of a landlord or manager, can suddenly be filled up with elements who are involved in these programs to work against certain individuals that live there. And that can all be part of a quid pro quo arrangement. And employers, politicians, basically anyone in any environment can be enlisted into these operations, directly, indirectly, overtly or covertly, wittingly or unwittingly, and they can be willing or unwilling by various degrees. But overall, the targeted person is at the extreme disadvantage in every case, and suffers damage of a significant sort and to a significant degree, and most of the time is never compensated, or injustice is never, most of the time, done at all for the sake of these people. Most of whom I would say are simply part of a scapegoating process that usually consolidates us. It's like a ritual sacrifice to bring a society of individuals together. They get to have one person or group ostracized, and then sort of they may put aside their differences a little more easily if they have a common foe and that sort of thing. So it's also useful for social control in that way. Whether the enemy be invented, or whether a person be reinvented as an enemy, or whether people are just afraid of becoming that guy, these are all subtle influences on the social mind and on the minds of individuals, which they often entertain subconsciously without even thinking. And again, all these processes can be augmented and catalyzed by psychotronics as a real weapon system, as a real modality of influence, most often without anyone's awareness that it's in operation. All these systems are intended to dovetail synergistically rather than anyone be very pronounced or exaggerated in in their reliance upon it or in its application, because this maximizes the covertness and the plausible deniability, and in the likelihood of overall the program to succeed, because There's no reliance or over-reliance on any one part or aspect. And they cover each other like an interlocking support system. The way a wheel functions is that the spokes must be well distributed and and it works well that way. Although it is centralized around a hub, and that's the most privileged group who are privy to the input of all the surveillance information, and who set or involved in the setting of the agenda, or through whom uniquely are disseminated the information and the direction which leads to the fulfillment of action in that in the social domains that are targeted, that lead to the fulfillment of the agendas of those who are in or have access to and control over that central hub, such as fusion centers, NSA headquarters, intelligence agency headquarters, the Pentagon, and so on. The Federal Reserve Bank, any collusion of interested individuals, such as the Committee of 300, the Bilderberg Group, and then who meets there. It just goes on. The black nobility of Europe, the royalty, the royal circles. It's all one big, well-integrated machine. To the extent that it is not well integrated, that's just an inevitable aspect of the entropy of power mongers, always angling and conniving even against one another, and often just in defense from the likelihood that they will be stabbed in the back or betrayed by one another, because look at what they know they're doing to a third party, a whole class of society, or especially groups and individuals in it, that they find problematic and wish to put under the thumb better. So that brings into perspective what the covert fifth column is, how it operates, that it is not necessarily a singular integrated entity, but a diverse, decentralized, distributed, compartmentalized entity. Oh yes, thank you. And therefore maximizes its covertness, its plausible deniability, and its ability to infiltrate and integrate with and streamline with and dovetail with whatever it is that it's used to target as a whole. I want to talk about a special, strange aspect of all this that I think that might sound fanciful at first, but if you think about it, it's nothing more than a specialized extension of all these things that have been addressed, which are just extensions of classical warfare brought to a civil environment and made covert and augmented by technology. That simple. And I'm talking about what I call the mystery shopper, the mystery shopper Wawa Club. This was going to blow your mind. Think about this in the context of covert civil warfare, as I've described it, and it might blow your mind, but it might not seem so strange. And I can show various types of mundane or conventional examples of it. Imagine this group who, in various ways, are inducted into a sort of apparatus, again, decentralized, compartmentalized, distributed, who are paid, basically, to simply operate as told. They can be recruited from their environments, or they can be processed from multi-generational involvement in these types of programs, or they can be recruited and stay in their environment, or they can be transplanted or replanted in different environments. But basically, a significant portion of their funding as individuals and groups comes from the counterfeit fiat currency scheme, or let's just say is certainly guaranteed by taxes or earmarked or protected from, insulated from the same competitive environment as anybody else's. That's not involved in this program. Kind of like how the government itself operates, if you think about it. Or let's just say the BBC channel, or other protected interests of the propaganda and pseudo-economic infrastructure, and politicians generally, and so on. This group I'm talking about, though, resembles those individuals who could be involved in the production of sound effects or act as extras in a film, background operators, environmental engineering kind of elements. And they're basically undercover in their role in society. They look like they're supposed to look. There's probably a warehouse of props provided to these individuals, so they can go from being a bum one day to a foppish dilettante the next, to you just name what the role needs to be. Now, what example do we have of this that's concrete and really exists? Actors. They get paid millions to act, to do these things in front of a camera that mean diddly squat. It all gets integrated into a cinematic feature. If you broke the fourth wall and looked at it as it was made, it would look like sausage. A lot of them don't even watch their own films. They just want the million. They just do the thing they're supposed to do and get the millions. Okay, it's just like that. Obviously, if there's a free roaming mobile form of this in society, it's not going to just be doing this for the hell of it. Just like movies aren't made just willy-nilly most of the time, but they're made with an intended effect on the viewer. It's a reciprocal relation of what viewers expect and what the producers want to program into the viewing public. Don't forget, psychotronics dovetails in with propaganda through television and cinema, no different than in other daily slice of life reality. This is basically a running reality TV show at this rate, when you look at the manipulation I'm talking about. Cognitive dissonance, the ego's resilience to strong deformations in the way it constellates its understanding of its environment and itself, prohibit most people from even being thinkable. And certainly they wouldn't want it to be thinkable, because that would imply they live in that environment, and that's, let's just say that ignorance does sometimes correlate strongly with bliss. If you think about how knowing certain things can ruin not only your day, but also they're afraid of contagion. If you know too much, or you know certain things about certain things, you end up attracting attention. And then there's the ancient mentality of superstition about these things. So that, speak of the devil and that sort of thing. So there is a kind of keep your head down, keep your nose to the grindstone. I don't want to get involved. You think about the supporting character in They Live. Kept on trying to dissuade Nada from looking further into things, and he just wanted to keep his job, walk his fine white line, and avoid problems. He had a job. He was picking himself up, getting on his feet. He didn't want to keep living in Justiceville, that homeless community, shelter community, forever. And George Nada is looking into events that might indicate some type of trouble or something he wouldn't want to get mixed up in. He says, look, man, I'm walking a fine line, staying out of trouble, and that's what you should be doing. And then George Nada says, white line's in the middle of the road. It's the worst place to drive. And of course, that's hilarious just on numerous counts. One, the white line's not in the middle of the road, it's on the side of the road. The yellow line's in the middle of the road, but the idea of driving in the middle of the road is a very good theme to bring up, because someone trying to avoid conflict all the time and trying to appease everybody, as Jesus said, is going to fail. And he's just going to end up becoming tainted with a lack of moral rectitude in the end, and a lack of discernible backbone and dignity. Better to pick a side and pick the right one, whatever the cost. And of course, it's the worst place to drive is in the middle of the road, obviously. Pick a side and get on it. But he's suggesting there's something about that prospect of avoidance it doesn't really get what it wants. You end up in the same situation anyway, just less informed and less involved in your own outcomes. So, looks like I just had to talk. I had a little dry throat there. Did a lily wave enhance that? Is it merely a sense of, because the parasympathetic nervous system and the sympathetic nervous system work together to alter saliva flow. Of course, electrical waves can modulate those nervous systems in order to, and thereby lead to chemical changes that lead to drying up of the throat, causing a cough. This can be done in probably very high speed. I could be constantly affected by it without knowing. I mean, it's a very evil scheme if you think about it in that way. But yeah, the way actors work, the way that entire aspect of live show business works, all point to a kind of ongoing, real life version of the mystery shopper Wawa Club that I'm telling you about. Now, leave them as they are, as say the propaganda branch of the mystery shopper Wawa Club, because they infiltrate our lives with their memes, with their narratives, with their plots, with their images, with their iconography, and they entrance us through their charisma and the craft of cinema and the other venues of art that these creative types get involved in. And there's nothing barring that the networks in Hollywood and the record industry and just like in other aspects of the controlled environment that I've been talking about this entire series of videos, can work together to make sure that certain types are favored and certain aren't, and they have their own pyramid scheme and their own targeting system for non-cooperatives. Star killing is real. All the there are many. Again, I can't go into the details of each instance that verifies this or backs it up empirically. I can do that in later videos. This is a synopsis of a broad idea. So again, you take that slice of life and economy and society, and now extend it to be more mobile, to be more grassroots, to be more local. You don't have to go to Hollywood to try out for stardom. You can just put on these clothes and then go sit next to that person in an ominous way, or you can persistently act like you're this or that type of person. You'll be given the props you need, the clothes, the car, the money. It's just like how undercover cops are paid to sometimes infiltrate different groups. It's the same thing. Or spies in classical espionage scenarios, or scouts whenever they're infiltrating enemy territory or environments. Same thing. And for the same reason, to manipulate those environments in favor of the one who wants control, who issues these programs for their agenda.